Karoline Leavitt doesn't hold back. In this explosive interview, she takes on a powerful political insider, exposing shocking truths that the mainstream won't tell you. With facts, confidence, and unfiltered honesty, she dismantles the establishment narrative, leaving no room for spin. You won't believe what she reveals. The camera's red light flickered on. The room was silent, tense. Karoline Leavitt, her hands steady, stared straight into the lens. Millions were watching. They didn't know what was coming. She took a deep breath. Tonight, I reveal something that will change everything, something they never wanted you to hear. The audience leaned closer. This was not just another interview. It was an earthquake waiting to happen. Across from her sat an older man, polished, powerful, untouchable. He smirked, adjusting his expensive cufflinks. "Karoline, let's not spread." She cut him off. "The people deserve the truth." Then with a calm voice, she spoke a name that had been buried, a name attached to a secret that could bring the most powerful men in the world to their knees. The man's face lost color. His hands trembled. "This can't be true," he whispered. Karoline nodded. "Oh, but it is." Then she dropped the first bombshell, the one no one saw coming, and the world stopped breathing. 2 days before the interview, a frail, elderly man had appeared at Karoline's door. His eyes held the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "You don't know me," he had said, "but I know you, and I know what they did." She had invited him in, listening as he told a tale so dark, so twisted, it felt impossible. But he had proof. Letters, photos, even a shaky old recording of a conversation that should have never been heard. He had been a loyal servant to one of the most powerful men in the country. He had watched, listened, kept their secrets. Until one day, his conscience could take no more. "They took everything from me," he whispered. "My family, my friends, my freedom." Karoline's heart pounded. "Why are you telling me this now?" The man gave a sad smile. "Because I won't be alive much longer, and the truth must be known before it's too late." Karoline had recorded everything, and now, in front of millions, she was about to play the recording that could change history. The powerful man in front of her shifted uncomfortably. "Don't do this." She pressed play, and the world heard the truth. The voice crackled through the speakers, faint but clear. The words sent chills down every spine. "You know what to do. Make it look like an accident. No loose ends." Gasps filled living rooms across the country. Grandparents clutched their hearts. Tears welled in the eyes of those who had suspected, but never knew for sure. Karoline looked at her guest, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Would you like to explain that?" The man shook his head. "That recording is taken out of context." Karoline smirked. "So you're saying the voice that belongs to you, giving direct orders to silence a man, is fake?" Silence. In that moment, the audience saw the truth, not in his words, but in his eyes. Then, Karoline revealed the final piece of evidence. A letter, handwritten, signed, the ultimate proof. The man stood up suddenly, knocking over his glass. His hands shook. "You don't understand the forces you're messing with." Karoline didn't blink. "No, I understand perfectly." And at that moment, something happened that made the entire world scream. The interview room was frozen in silence. The powerful man's hands trembled. He glanced toward the camera as if realizing, for the first time, that the whole world was watching. Karoline held up the letter. The one that proved everything. The one that carried a signature too powerful to ignore. "Do you deny signing this?" she asked, her voice steady. The man swallowed hard. His face turned pale. The audience, millions of them, mothers, fathers, grandparents, held their breath. They had lived through lies. They had trusted. And now, everything was crumbling before their eyes. Karoline turned to the camera. This document proves that someone very powerful ordered the unthinkable. And this name, she paused, will break your heart. She read the name out loud. Gasps filled homes across the country. The name belonged to someone they had once believed in, someone who had promised them safety, truth, and justice. Viewers clutched their chests. Tears streamed down wrinkled faces. Karoline didn't stop. You have been lied to for years, and tonight I will show you everything. The man across from her whispered, You don't know what you've done. But it was too late. The truth was out. 3 days before the interview, Karoline had met someone in secret, an old journalist, a man who once worked inside the very system she was exposing. He had spent years digging for the truth. Then one day he disappeared. His friends said he had left the country. His family was told he had an accident. But Karoline found him, alive, hiding. His voice shook when he spoke. They will come after you if you tell this story. Karoline recorded every word. They silenced my best friend, he said, his eyes heavy with grief. He had evidence, proof that they were controlling everything, the media, the elections, the leaders. And then, he was gone. Karoline leaned in. Where is the proof? The old journalist pulled out a small, worn-out flash drive. Here, he whispered. But if you play this, you won't be safe either. Karoline knew the risks. Now, during the interview, she reached into her pocket. She pulled out the flash drive. The powerful man across from her stiffened. You wouldn't dare, he whispered. Karoline plugged it in. The screen behind them flickered, and the world saw the evidence. The video began to play. At first, there was nothing but static. Then, a voice, deep, commanding. You will follow orders. You will say nothing. A hidden camera had captured the meeting. Shadows of powerful men huddled around a table, their faces blurred, but their voices unmistakable. You understand what happens if this gets out? One of them asked. A trembling voice answered, Yes, I understand. The viewers at home gripped their seats. They had been told lies for years. But this was the moment they realized just how deep the deception went. Tears streamed down faces. Some reached for their phones, calling loved ones. Some sat in silence, overwhelmed with heartbreak. Karoline turned to the powerful man sitting across from her. Do you still deny it? His hands curled into fists. This doesn't prove anything. But Karoline wasn't finished. She pulled out one final piece of evidence, a letter written by a famous world leader before his mysterious death. This, she said, her voice shaking, was his final warning to the world. The man's eyes widened, and then, before he could speak, the lights in the studio flickered. Something was happening, something they didn't expect. The lights in the studio flickered again. A sharp buzzing noise filled the air. Karoline held up the letter, her hands steady, but her heart pounding. This, she said, was written by someone who tried to warn us, someone who was silenced before they could tell the world the truth. The camera zoomed in on the paper. The handwriting was old but clear. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. The audience gasped. Many at home clutched their chests, whispering the name under their breath. This leader had once stood for justice. He had spoken of peace. He had warned that evil was working behind the scenes. But before he could reveal everything, tragedy struck. The powerful man across from Karoline leaned forward. His voice was hoarse. You have no idea what you're doing. Karoline's eyes locked onto his. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. She began to read the letter aloud. And as the words echoed through the studio, the man's face drained of color, because the truth was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. As Karoline read, the audience at home sat frozen. Some wept. Some whispered prayers. The letter was a warning, a final plea. They control everything, it said. The elections, the wars, the money, and soon they will control you. The leader had tried to stop them, but he was betrayed from within. They will not let me live if I speak, but if you are reading this, know that I tried. I tried to save you. A tear slipped down Karoline's cheek. The man across from her clenched his jaw. This is why he was killed, she said. Not because of accidents, not because of illness, but because he knew too much. The studio was silent. Then, something terrifying happened. The screen behind Karoline glitched. A strange static filled the air. And suddenly, just for a second, an unfamiliar voice came through. They are watching. The words sent a chill down everyone's spine. The man across from her stood abruptly. His chair toppled over. We're done here. But Karoline wasn't done. She turned back to the camera. The truth is out now, and no one can stop it. Karoline took a deep breath. She knew she was in danger now, but she didn't care. She turned back to the camera, looking straight into the eyes of millions of people watching from their homes. They have been lying to you, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. They have taken your trust and used it against you. Tears streamed down faces across the nation. Elderly men and women who had lived through decades of deception now saw it all unravel before them. She held up the flash drive one last time. This contains proof. But if something happens to me after this, promise me one thing. Do not forget what you heard tonight. The man across from her slammed his fist on the table. Enough! But Karoline didn't stop. You silenced the greatest minds of our time. You erased their warnings. But you will not erase me. She reached into her pocket. And then, she pressed a button. And the entire world saw what they never thought possible. Karoline's finger hovered over the button. The studio was silent. The whole world was watching. The man across from her, once confident, untouchable, now looked afraid. She pressed it. The screen behind them flickered. Then the video began to play. It was grainy, but the voices were clear. The same men from the earlier secret recording, only this time, their faces were visible. Powerful figures, world leaders, trusted voices. They were laughing. A voice spoke. The people will never know. We control everything, even their truth. Gasps erupted across the country. Grandparents who had lived through wars, betrayal, and political lies gripped their chairs. Some wept. Some whispered prayers, their hands shaking. Karoline's own eyes filled with tears. You took their trust, she said. You built your power on their hope, and now they see who you really are. The man slammed his fists on the table. You don't understand what you've done. But Karoline wasn't afraid anymore. The world deserves to know, she said. And that was when the feed suddenly cut off. The screen went black, and a chilling silence fell over the studio. The cameras went dead. The lights flickered. Millions of people sat frozen in front of their screens. Karoline looked around the studio. The powerful man was already reaching for his phone, whispering something under his breath. A deep voice echoed through the room, the voice of the producer. We've lost the broadcast. Karoline's heart pounded. This was no accident. She turned back to the man. You cut the feed? He smirked. You should have listened when I told you to stop. But Karoline had planned for this. She pulled out her phone. A backup live stream was still running. Millions were still watching. She lifted the phone to the man's face. Say that again, she said. For the first time, he hesitated. The people at home held their breath. They had been lied to for years, but now they were awake. And then, Karoline's phone buzzed. A message. 4 words that sent chills down her spine. They are coming for you. She looked up, and in the distance she heard it. Sirens. Karoline's hands shook. The sirens grew louder. She looked at the camera one last time. If anything happens to me, promise me one thing. Don't forget the truth. Tears streamed down faces across the world. The man across from her straightened his suit. "It's over, Karoline." But Karoline wasn't done. She grabbed the microphone. "No, it's just beginning." She turned back to her phone. Her backup team had already uploaded everything. The footage, the letters, the evidence. It was spreading like wildfire. She could see the numbers. Millions watching, millions sharing. A knock on the studio door. Then a loud bang. Karoline took a deep breath. She had done what she came to do. The truth was out. And no matter what happened next, the world would never be the same again. The door burst open, and everything went black. Everything went black. Karoline felt herself being pulled. Strong hands gripped her arms. She heard muffled voices, urgent whispers. She tried to move, but the world around her was spinning. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the powerful man's voice. She went too far. Then a door slammed. Silence. The audience at home was screaming at their screens. They had watched everything unfold live. Grandparents sat in shock, tears rolling down their faces. "What did they do to her?" they whispered. The backup stream had been cut. But the truth had already escaped. The footage had spread. The people knew. Karoline forced her eyes open. She was in the back of a black SUV moving fast. A man sat across from her, watching. His face was hidden in the shadows. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. Karoline's voice was hoarse. "You can take me, but you can't take the truth." The man smirked. "We'll see about that." The car turned sharply. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew one thing. This wasn't over. The world had seen too much. The truth was out, and no amount of silence could erase it. Grandparents held their grandchildren close, tears in their eyes. They had seen this before. Good people silenced for speaking up. But this time was different. The people refused to look away. Millions took to the streets, holding signs with Karoline's name. They demanded answers. Where is she? News stations tried to ignore it. The government refused to comment. But the people weren't backing down. In a small house, an elderly man sat by his radio, his hands shaking. He had fought wars for freedom. He had lost friends to lies. And now, he whispered, "Not again." He turned to his old typewriter and began to write. A letter, a plea, a warning to the world. And he wasn't alone. Veterans, journalists, families. They all started speaking out. They remembered what Karoline had said. "If anything happens to me, don't forget the truth." The people had a choice, and this time, they were ready to fight. Karoline's heart pounded. The SUV was still moving fast through an empty road. She needed to think. She needed a way out. The man across from her watched her closely. "You should have listened, Karoline." She forced herself to sit up. "People know the truth now, it's too late." The man leaned forward. "It's never too late to bury the past." She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced at the door handle. Locked. Of course. But then, fate stepped in. A sudden explosion. The SUV swerved violently. Karoline was thrown forward as the tires screeched. Smoke filled the air. A second later, the door flung open. A voice shouted, "Karoline, run!" She didn't think. She jumped. Her feet hit the cold pavement. The wind whipped against her face. Somewhere behind her, the powerful man was screaming. But she didn't look back. She was free. For now. But she knew the fight was far from over, and the world was waiting for her return. Karoline ran. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed for air, but she didn't stop. Behind her, the SUV doors slammed. Voices shouted. Flashlights cut through the darkness. But then, a miracle. A car screeched to a stop ahead of her. The back door flew open. "Get in." She recognized the voice. A voice she never expected to hear. It was Tucker Carlson. Karoline didn't hesitate. She dove into the car, slamming the door shut. The engine roared and they sped away into the night. Tucker's grip on the wheel was tight. His eyes were sharp, serious. "They're everywhere, Karoline. You weren't supposed to make it out alive." She looked at him, breathing heavily. "Then why did you come for me?" He glanced at her. "Because the world needs to hear the truth, and you're the only one left to tell it." Karoline wiped the sweat from her forehead. "They won't stop." Tucker's jaw clenched. "Neither will we." Outside, sirens blared in the distance. But for the first time, Karoline felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. They drove through the night, switching cars twice. Karoline knew the clock was ticking. By morning, they reached a safe house, hidden deep in the mountains. Inside, a team was waiting. Camera crew, security, journalists who had been silenced before. Tucker turned to her. "You have one shot at this. We stream this live, and the world will know the truth. But once it's out, there's no turning back." Karoline swallowed hard. "I was never turning back." They set up the cameras. The feed was connected. Within minutes, millions of people were tuning in. The world had been waiting. Karoline took a deep breath, staring into the lens. "My name is Karoline Leavitt," she said. "They tried to silence me. They tried to erase the truth. But I'm still here. And I'm about to tell you everything." She pulled out the flash drive. She played the final piece of evidence. The world watched. And for the first time in history, the people saw everything. Governments shook. Leaders panicked. And the people, they wept. Tears fell from the faces of millions. Grandparents clutched their hearts, whispering, "I knew it. I knew it all along." People flooded the streets, not in anger but in unity. The system that had ruled for decades was exposed. No more lies, no more deception. And Karoline, she became a symbol of truth. World leaders resigned, some fled, others were arrested. The people reclaimed their voices. Months later, Karoline stood on a stage, looking out at the millions who had gathered to hear her speak. Tucker stood beside her. So did other truth seekers, those who had fought, suffered, and survived. Karoline gripped the microphone. "This was never about me. This was about you, your children, your grandchildren, about standing up when no one else would." The crowd erupted into cheers. Somewhere in homes across the world, elderly viewers wiped their tears. For the first time in decades, they felt peace. Truth had won, and nothing would ever be the same again. Now, my friends, I ask you this. Did this story move you? Did it make you feel something deep inside? If it did, don't stay silent. Like, comment, subscribe. Let the world know you stand for the truth. Because if we don't stand together, who will? Drop a comment below and tell me what shocked you the most, and hit that subscribe button, because this is just the beginning.